The inaugural Irish Festival of Speed took place in the grounds of Adare Manor, County Limerick over the August Bank Holiday weekend. The core of the event was a sprint organised by the Limerick Motor Club on a course surrounded by displays put on by classic car enthusiasts. In the centre of the track was a brilliantly organised open paddock which created a uniquely relaxed area where drivers and spectators could intermingle amongst the fabulous machinery which was on display between races. We met Paul O'Connor being taken for a walk by his dog Bouncer. He doesn't mind the sound of cars.
No.
He's kind of well used to it.
He seems to be, yeah. It's been a while since he heard one now, mind you.
That's true, yeah. That's not his fault.
No, yeah.
Simon McKinley had been very busy in the build-up to the event, as he was not only out in the Connacht Competition Engines Irish Hill Climb and Sprint Championship leading Lant, but he'd also been invited to do some demonstration runs in the legendary White Escort, with which he came to prominence. Refurbishment of the Escort was only completed in the early hours of Saturday morning before heading to the event. This left some fettling to be done on the DRS system on the Lant. The Escort, however, performed properly right from the off, and the fans were treated to 3 untimed displays. The event was a unique mix of historic machinery, old and new. Detlef Hare raced his magnificent racing green Bentley 1927 Sid Lawrence Special, while Ed Cassidy was a little bit quicker in the 1935 Iona Special, also in the pre-war class. Mark Brennan, in the glistening 1926 Alvis, was third in the group, with Ken McAvoy claiming second place, ahead of him in the Austin 7 Special, despite an indiscretion with the bales. Kieran White was fastest of them all in the 1938 TRS. David Quelly was second in the pre-1955 class, with his characterful-looking 1948 Turner. Frank Nuttall, a stalwart of Irish hill climbing sprints, won the class in the 1955 Graham. There was a great entry in the HRCA class for pre-1974 cars. Stephen Doyle was the fastest of these in a Lotus Elan. Liam Power was second in an MG Midget. Clive Brandon was close behind him in another Lotus. His was a 1969 Europa. He was just a hair's breadth ahead of another 69 car, the Midget of Wolfgang Schneier. Another moonwalker was James O'Mahony in a beastly 1969 Chevrolet Camaro 5.7. Mervyn Johnston and Alec Poole showed us some of that mini magic in their Coopers and headed off the 1973 Porsche 911 RS of Paul Gray. The competition in this class was extremely close. Barry Smith's Escort Mexico was just 1/100th of a second slower than the Porsche. Nino Forte just made the top 10 in the class in an MG Midget, ahead of Colm Hines' 1965 Ford Cortina GT. Pat McDonough was just behind him in the 1967 Mark II version of that car. Connie Ward drove a 1973 Morris Mini Cooper. But Liam Ruth and James Doherty could not be separated with identical times. Ruth drove a Midget while Doherty drove the wedding car of Dennis and Shifra Hogan, the Tiger Avenger. Paul Chidecki drove an Elan and finished ahead of Sean Murray's rare 2+2 version of the Lotus. 4 very different cars headed the rally class. Fastest was Pat O'Herson's Escort WRC. Local man Eamon Daly tossed a few bales but finished second ahead of Eugene Donnelly in a Mark II Escort. Peter Cummins was 4th in his Darien T90. 5th in the class and 2nd of the timed Mark II escorts was Eamon Dervin. Douglas Richardson was next in his 2.5 litre Mark II. Kevin O'Connor mixed it with the escorts in his Citroen C2 R2. Torsten Schmidt was just ahead of Ed Sinan. Ger Lyons managed to hold off the escort Cosworth of Dan Mulcahy with his Honda Civic, Mulcahy's anti-lag worrying the gamekeepers at the Manor. Liam Mulcair was super sideways in his Mark II escort, putting on a great show in front of the huge crowds. John O'Connor, also in the Citroen C2 R2, had a close fight with the Honda Civic Type R of John Collins. Liam Fitzgibbon wasn't far behind them in his Ford. Anthony O'Halloran reminded us that escorts aren't the only rear-wheel drive rally cars in the country, driving his Opel Manta 400. Sean Lyons' converted rear-wheel drive Mark VI escort was sandwiched between the two more traditional escorts of Dennis Dineen and Michael O'Sullivan. Sean O'Carroll also drove a Mark II escort. Former international rally driver Rosemary Smith did some demonstration laps in a Lotus Elan, while Trish Daly was one of only 3 women entered in the competitive event, with her Austin Mini in the saloon class. And Megan Kessie, following in her father's footsteps, in the racing and sports class in the Ginetta G20 Coupe. Also in the saloon class for hill climb, sprint and racing cars was David Maloney, who was 7th in his Golf G60. Peter Murray charged around the course in his BMW 6 Series. John Fitzgerald also displayed some Bavarian muscle in his M5 engined M3. Ian Quinn's motorcycle engine Mini is a completely different but effective approach to going fast. He was 4th in the class. Jim Doherty was 3rd in his Vauxhall engined rear-wheel drive Starlet. Dennis Hogan merely had to scale the Manor wall to enter the event from his home. What fuel he saved in commuting, I'm sure the M5 was happy to guzzle on track, on course for 2nd place. Éanna Carroll was fastest of these cars, but missed out on being fastest saloon of the day by less than 0.2 of a second to Peter Hurston's Escort WRC. Did he leave a horse outside? It was still an excellent result for Éanna, who drives a Honda Civic Turbo. Dan Daly gave us a taste of Formula 1 in his Jordan 193, while John Daly also made some great sounds in the Lola F3000 car. David Beattie certainly had the most impressive rear wing of the day on his Porsche 911. Philip Jones had to switch to a spare car after trouble with his 911. Thomas Hallisey's GT3 Porsche was nice and lively out on the track. Deirdre Delaney split the Porsches with her Formula Vauxhall Junior single-seater. Dave O'Brien was very impressive in his Porsche GT3 road car. Edwin Reinhardt in his Delta T83 was next up, of the smaller single-seaters. Pat McBennett was very quick in his Lotus Elise, but was just beaten by Arnie Black in the Crosley 9S after a close battle. John Mahan in his DJ put in a great effort to catch Paul Heavy's Spire GTR, but didn't quite make it. The top 10 of the event was completely dominated by Hill Climb and Sprint Championship regulars, and indeed 5 of the drivers were using that championship sponsor, Connacht Competition Engines. 10th was Dermot Nolan in a Reynard. Seamus Morris came from Northern Ireland and finished 9th in his Pilbeam MP62. 8th was Dubliner Alan Kessie in his Griffin C73. Joe Courtney had a great result in his OMS. Brendan Keane double drove what must be one of the hardest worked cars in the country, Dermot Nolan's Reynard, after trouble with his own car. Rory Stevens was another to rearrange the bales, but he did a great second run for 5th overall. The top 4 tussle was scintillating. McKinley was first to hit the track, and he set the fastest time on run 1 at 60.26 seconds. Sylvie Mullins was next out, and his time was just half a second slower and put him 2nd. Paul O'Connell was next out after only completing the rebuild of his car after the crash in Donegal last season. He went 3rd, only to be pushed down to 4th by his old rival Frank Burns, who had been collecting for the Paul O'Connell Pilbeam Fund earlier that day.
Money lads, it's the Paul O'Connell Fund.
The second and final run was held in the early evening. Burns improved on his first run time, but O'Connell leapfrogged him by over a second to finish 3rd, reaching the pace of the first run after a confidence-building day. McKinley came out ahead of Sylvie Mullins for the last run, and pushed the Lant over a second and a half quicker around the course. Mullins, in the F1 engined Gould, was also on a flying lap. As the light was fading on a memorable day, the Clare man stopped the clocks over a full half second quicker than McKinley to win the event. It would be a crying shame if the Irish Festival of Speed does not become a regular on the motorsport calendar. A truly world-class event.